Hello viewers, I am Dr. Gore Vittal. In this session, you will learn H.G. Wells' science fiction, The Time Machine. It was published in 1895. This story is generally credited with popular concept of travelling with the help of a vehicle that crosses the limits of time. H.G. Wells coined the phrase, the time machine, which is now universally accepted. Some of the 21st century scientists have been working on creating a real time machine which can take travelers backward and forward into the time the traveler wants to go to. This is an interesting novel which inspires learners how to be scientific in approach. H.G. Wells is well known for his scientific fictions. He was born in Bromley, Kent on 21st of September 1866. His father was a shopkeeper and a former domestic servant. In 1880, his father faces some financial problems which resulted in forcing his mother to work. Wells struggled in his life, like his father and mother both. He worked as a draper, then as a science teacher until 1890. He began his career as a writer in 1893. While working as a teacher, he acquired scientific approach, and the same he adopted in his first novel, The Time Machine, which published in 1895. Then he gave a series of scientific novels such as The Island of Dr. Moreau, published in 1896, The Invisible Man, published in 1897, and The War of the Worlds, published in 1898. This series of scientific fictions established his reputation as a scientific fiction writer. Wells also authored a couple of less known novels like The First Man on the Moon and The War in the Air, both published in 1908. Besides writing novels, Wells also wrote several pamphlets on the political and social topics. He understood the pulse of the readers and made a seminal contribution to the field of British novels, particularly introduced a new branch of writing called scientific novels. He wrote hundreds of books, short stories, essays, pamphlets, etc. Such a prolific literary figure, having social and political consciousness, died in London on 18th of August 1946. History of the scientific novel, The Time Machine. The foundation of the science fiction, The Time Machine, was laid in the college where H.G. Wells published a short story titled The Chronic Argonauts in the college newspaper. Then Wells started writing for Pall Mall Gazette and contributed many articles. Later, Hahnemann published the serial novel in 1895. Then William Ernest Henley started a new venture, New Review, and requested Wells for writing a serial novel on the same theme. Obviously, H.G. Wells used some material for this serial novel. The first book was published in New York by Henry Holt and Company. The story is based on the same time travel concept which Wells expanded in the novel The Time Machine. The science fiction, The Time Machine, basically reflects Wells's social and political views. He expresses his anguish about the industrial relations and its impact on the life of common people. According to some critics, H. G. Wells was highly influenced by a socialist, Ray Lankester, and his theory of social degeneration. Similarly, he shared some of the elements with Edward Bulwer Lytton's novel Reel. Plot. Most of the novels written by H. G. Wells begin with a narrator narrating the story and creating a framework for the major and important aspects of the story. In The Time Machine, the novelist has projected Helia as the narrator of the story. He is one of the admirers of the time traveler and always keenly listens to the amazing stories. The action took place at the time traveler's house, where he has invited his associates for a dinner party. Next week, the time traveler once again invites some of his acquaintances for a dinner party. In the second dinner gathering, the point of view of the novel changes to the views of the time traveler. The time traveler begins to narrate his experiences of his journey in the future and provides certain evidences. It is continued uninterruptedly till the 7th chapter. Once the time traveler ends with the narration of his experiences, the narrator comes into action and takes the charge of the narrator. He passes his comments about the time traveler's scientific and experimental stories. Helia, the narrator, is sympathetic towards the time traveler and believes that the time traveler's observations, experiences, and speculations might be possible. Throughout the novel, the presence of the narrator has been experienced. He is the mediator between the protagonist and the readers. His personal assumptions, like sympathy for the marginalized and weak, like Eloy, and for the protagonist, are seen in the course of the novel. The novel ends with an epilogue. It concludes the novel with a message that the present is harsh and the future is terrible. The habitants need to meet the demands of time and behave accordingly. The narrator shows a ray of hope for the future, but also warns us about the probable horrors of the future. Setting of the novel. The novel has only physical setting, but there are 3 temporal settings as well. The novel opens in the house of the time traveler in Richmond. It is a borough on the bank of the Thames River in the outskirts of the city. It opens in the 19th century London. Specifically, the novelist does not describe the room occupied by the traveler. The laboratory, dining room, and the smoking room are mentioned here, but they are not fully described. They are just the setting for the stories narrated by the protagonist. Various characters of the novel gather in the house, sit around the time traveler, and listen to the stories narrated. There are 3 temporal settings as well. They are the part of the stories narrated by the protagonist. He undertakes a journey in the future, and the setting also goes under change. His presence and struggle in the forest, his description of the habitation of the Morlocks deep in the earth, and the landscape of the Thames River after 30 million years further in the future. These settings seem to be unreal, but the time traveler makes it real by his effective depiction and description. Characters in the novel. Many characters come before the readers in the course of the novel. There are a few major and minor characters who contribute to the development of the story. Major characters. The time traveler is the central character of this novel. He is intelligent and well-read person who is well versed in the contemporary theories of science and strongly believes in Darwinian theories. Many critics believe that the character portrayal of the time traveler is nothing but the representation of the novelist himself. His observations of the world around is the actual observation of H.G. Wells of his time. The time traveler attempts to draw certain conclusions based on his research and observations about the future of the highly technological world. He is humorous, playful, accessible, and adaptable. The time traveler is the protagonist of the novel. He is the focal character throughout the developments in the story. His journey into the future is the most interesting aspect of this novel. Helia, the narrator. Helia is the narrator of this novel, who is also one of the admirers of the time traveler. He also appreciates the traveler's scientific ideas and pronounces that the idea of time travel can come into reality. He is one of the three characters who attend both the dinners offered by the time traveler. Eloi. Eloi is a community of people who enjoy their life and do nothing. They are peaceful, weak, and lethargic people. They are small in stature and fragile. Eloi populate the earth in a large number in the year 802701. All day they eat, play, party, and do nothing. They are always worried of their security and the possibility of Morlocks attack, and they sleep in large chambers to protect themselves from the dark. They can't work hard and have no stamina for long-term commitment. They are not interested in intellectual pursuit and show no interest in the time traveler's endeavors. Morlocks. Morlocks is a community of people who look like apes. They are the descendants of the working class people of the 19th century. They continue to work hard even in the year 802701. Morlocks hardly come onto the surface of the earth. They prefer to live deep in the earth. They are very sensitive to light and have developed the necessary physical strength to live deep in the earth. They like to have Eloi for feast. Hence, Eloi try to hide themselves from the Morlocks. The Morlocks community play the role of the antagonist in the novel. They are against the Eloi community and always search Eloi for their feast. Similarly, they attack the time traveler for many times and took away his time machine and hide it in a statue, which prevents the time traveler to go back to his own real world. Vena and the time traveler develop amicable relationship. Vena sometimes serves as a source of information to the time traveler. Eventually, she is attacked by the Morlocks for many times. To safeguard from the attacks of the Morlocks, the time traveler builds fire. Later, it became enormous forest fire in which Vena dies for no fault. Minor characters in the novel. There are some minor characters in the novel. They perform some minor roles but crucial in the development of the novel. The medical man. The medical man is very smart and skeptical. He is one of the three who attended both the dinners offered by the time traveler. He appreciates the endeavors of the time traveler but always asks certain doubts about the scientific idea of the traveler. The psychologist. The psychologist is one of the three who attended both the gatherings and dinners offered by the time traveler. He appreciates the efforts of the time traveler but logically thinks that the idea of time travel may not take place. The psychologist is introspective and hardly expresses his opinion about certain things of which he himself is uncertain. The editor. The editor is skeptical and has attended the second dinner party offered by the time traveler. He listens to the traveler but is convinced with the idea of time travel. He makes the fun of the time traveler and his ideas as well. He also cracks some jokes. When the time traveler appears at the dinner party and does the same even after the end of the story narrated by the time traveler. Provincial mayor. The provincial mayor is a common person having no interest in science and scientific inventions. He attends the first meeting and later avoids visiting the time traveler. Philby. Philby is a person who attends the first meeting only. He is described as an argumentative man with red hair. He believes that a time traveler's ideas are against reason. Man with a beard. The man with a beard is a shy and quiet person who is unknown to the narrator. He attends the second meeting only. A very young man. This character is portrayed as a very young man. He attends the first meeting and listens to the time traveler carefully. He participates in the discussion and gives the fourth dimension to the story. Summary of the novel, The Time Machine. The Time Machine is an interesting science fiction. Helia is the narrator of the novel, but in between the protagonist, the time traveler also narrates some stories and his experiences of the journey into the future. The novel opens with a conversation among the associates of the time traveler. He shows them a prototype of the time machine and tells them that he has the actual one in his laboratory. He talks about the theory of relativity of time, space, and human existence. All the associates gathered there carefully listen to him. Some of them appreciate the idea of time travel, but a few have different opinions which they do not disclose before the protagonist only because of certain etiquettes. The time traveler says, "We are always getting for the present moment. Our mental existences, which are immaterial and have no dimensions, are passing along the time dimension with a uniform velocity from the cradle to the grave." The next week, once again, the time traveler invites his associates for a dinner party. But he himself gets late for half an hour, which is disliked by them. The time traveler claims that he got late because of the time machine. The associates think that the time machine is useless, which cannot enable the owner to be punctual and on time. The time traveler's late arrival to the party makes his earlier claims futile. It sends a wrong impression and a wrong signal about the machine and its reliability and credibility. The time traveler's act is inexcusable. More, his appearance is also untidy and disordered. Still, he narrates the story of his journey into the future. During the narration, the time traveler tells his audience that he has undertaken a journey into the future and has gone far into the year 802701. He meets the descendants of human beings called Eloi and Molochs. In the course of his journey, he lost his time machine, which was taken away by the Molochs, but anyhow he could retain it from the people of the future. He talks about his association with the Eloi and Molochs, descendants of the present human generations of the 19th century. Eloi have machines which work for them. They are the fragile, short descendants of the present human generations. Molochs are ape-like people who are sensitive to light and fire. Molochs prefer to live deep into the earth, which keeps them away from sunlight. Then, the time traveler shares his experience with an Eloi named Vina, who has been very cooperative to the traveler, and he could gather so much information from her about their community and that of Molochs. Vina has been quite instrumental in searching his time machine from the deep earth where the Molochs have hidden it and try to sustain from the time traveler. The time traveler thinks that Eloi represents the aristocratic class, whereas Molochs the working class. Eloi are always afraid of the Molochs because Molochs like to pray Eloi for their feast. Molochs are disgusting. On the contrary, Eloi are humble, fragile, and soft. While searching the time machine, the time traveler, along with Vena, reaches to the Molochs territory. Molochs realize that the time traveler has come in search of the time machine. The Molochs chase and drive them out of the territory. In the security point of view, the time traveler and Vena search a safe place. They land up in a museum where they set a fire which gets out of control and spreads into the adjacent forest. In the fire, Vena dies, but the time traveler gets back his time machine and could come back to the present time. After narrating the story, he expects the responses from his associates. The story has been incredible. They keep pondering about the narration and expressed certain doubts, but a few admit the potential of the time machine. The next day, Helia, the narrator, comes back to the time traveler's house, asking him whether the story was true. The time traveler asks him to wait for half an hour for witnessing the evidence. Then the time traveler gets into his laboratory. The narrator could see a glimpse of a figure which disappears. The narrator continues to wait for the time traveler for 3 days, but in vain. The time traveler does not return. The novel comes to an end with the narrator pondering whether the time traveler will ever come back. Themes in the novel The Time Machine. Theme of capitalism. The Time Machine has two major themes which run parallel throughout the novel. The theme of capitalism, which is harmful and dangerous to the workers. This theme can be studied in the context of the novel in the characters such as the time traveler, Morlocks, and alloy communities who are portrayed quite positively in this novel. The novel depicts the aristocracy of London life and the social and political domination of certain groups which affect the decisions and policy making. The novelist specifically portrays his characters that resemble to different class of the British life. Wells depicts the political chaos and the problem of hierarchy in the system. The working class keeps on working for hours together with no perpetual and justified gains, whereas the aristocratic and industrialist class extort the marginalized class and dominates the policymakers to make policies of their interest. The novel also depicts the theme of rise and fall of mankind. It is certain that human beings keeps on making progress in all spheres of life, and the process of social, cultural and scientific progress is inevitable. On the other hand, the development and progress may cause certain damage in a few realms of life, and any unplanned progress may cause a great deal to mankind. The novel specifically deals with the probable threats of scientific development. Science theories, formulas and inventions should be constructively and positively used for the overall planned development of mankind, but its dangers and harmful effects are inevitable. The novel ends with optimism that science would change human life, and similarly, it makes us aware of threats caused by the scientific development. The theme of relativity of time. The theme of relativity of time is one of the major themes of this novel. The title itself is apt and suggestive. It gives us the impression that machine can go beyond the reach of its time constraints and can cross the barriers of time. The time machine that takes the protagonist into the future seems to be practically impossible. But Albert Einstein's groundbreaking theoretical implications in 1905 about relativity changed the perceptions of the generation. The novel describes the protagonist as a man of scientific values. He undertakes a series of journeys into the future and narrates his experiences to his associates. The theme of emotion, sympathy and hatred. The theme of emotion, sympathy and hatred is a minor theme in this novel. The novel begins with a narration, and the narrator has sympathy for the time traveler. The time traveler, who is the protagonist, sympathizes Veena and Aloy for her behavior, courtesy and faithfulness. On the other hand, Veena seems to be very emotional, always missing her community and totally rely on the time traveler for her safety and security. The novel also describes the hatred relationship between Eloi and Molochs. Molochs keep searching Eloi to pray them for their feast, whereas Eloi hide themselves from the Molochs. I hope you have enjoyed and learned two threads of the novel, The Time Machine. See you once again in the next session. Thank you.